Okay, Battery Park. Now, we call it Battery Park not because of the... This is such a bad joke. We call it Battery Park not because of the modern Duracell batteries, but because of the artillery batteries of New York City's past. Bet you didn't know that. So, we're at the most southern tip of Manhattan. It's a very strategic location, right? If you think sea-wise, if you look on the globe, very strategic location. And if you're fighting over land, this is the place where you'd want to place a few cannons or forts to protect your city, right? And that's exactly what happened. This was a very strategic place to fight Dutch against the British against the Dutch, the British against the Americans, and finally the Americans against the British, and that ended it. But until then, this was a very strategic war location. They had a bunch of cannons and an artillery battery, therefore Battery Park, which is a 24-acre public park. It's pretty nice, and we get to see a bunch of historic landmarks, so we're at a very strategic point. You can see the Statue of Liberty, my favorite statue in the world. She's so beautiful. We also have Ellis Island, right, which is a pretty neat building. We have beautiful state of New Jersey, the Garden State, as you can see. We have Brooklyn, also this way, pretty hip. We're going to start with Statue of Liberty, okay, because she's my favorite. Statue of Liberty stands at 151 feet atop an 89-foot pedestal. She carries a torch, and she's pretty modern. She carries an iPad. Gift of Steve Jobs. It's pretty nice, right? Yes. Anyway, Statue of Liberty, I always knew that it was a gift from the French. That's what I learned in like 8th grade history class. But they never really told us the full story. And I always thought that it was the French government that was like, Napoleon was like, I love America so much, I'm going to give you this statue. And I never understood how it all came together. So today, as my gift to you, you're so lucky, you're going to find out what the story is and how it came to be and yada, yada, yada. So, let's go back to the American Revolution. Without the French, the Americans would not have beat the British. That's a pretty big deal. The French provided arms, they gave them ships, they gave them men, they gave them support throughout the whole war. And it was an alliance that the French would not forget, even 100 years later. So here we are, 1865, it's the end of the American Civil War, and we have these fancy scholar people sitting in France at a dinner party at the home of Edouard de Liboulet. Yes, I took French, as you can tell. And this guy is a pretty intelligent guy, he's an intellectual, so he gathers a bunch of intellectuals into his place, and I imagine they're sitting by the fireplace, sipping some wine. And what do they talk about? Here in America at a dinner party, we might be talking about the Kardashians or Honey Boo Boo, but these people are talking about real important stuff like, how can we reward America? How can we show America how much we admire their democratic ideals? So that's what they're thinking about, right? And they want to show that France is also on board with those ideals. Now this is a time when they're very against Napoleon, and these are people who, they're free thinkers. They're free thinkers, and they're sitting around and they're thinking about how we're going to do this and what we can do. Now sitting in the living room is a very cool guy, 31-year-old Bartholdi, who is a sculptor from Colmar, France. Never been there, but it sounds cool. And he's sitting there and he says, you know what? We could do something. We could build them a statue. So he starts to draw up some ideas, and he thinks, okay, well, we could base the statue off of the Roman goddess Libertas, representing freedom, Statue of Liberty, right? So there's a lot of rumors also that he based the face of the Statue of Liberty on his mother's face. And I Googled some pictures, and you could see side by side that that might have been very true, that he based her face off of his mother. looked a little manly, but it's a strong woman, you know. She's a strong woman, so you can forgive her for that. I mean, she's got to have guts, and you know, she's got to have that fierceness. The Statue of Liberty, she carries a torch. I mean, that would make sense. So the way that they're doing this, obviously the French government, Napoleon's not going to give them a dime for such a dumb project in his mind. So they gather up support, and they think, okay, so we're going to come up with the money to pay for the statue, and then we're going to call America, and we're going to have them pay for the pedestal and give us the land. It's all good. That's the deal. They seal the deal, and the statue starts to be built. Now, Americans are pretty laid back, right? And by the time the statue arrives here on New York Harbor, it's sitting here. It's here. It's finally here. It's ready. In 214 crates, all the pieces of this woman, and we still don't have the pedestal. And that's pretty embarrassing. I mean, all we had to do was come up with the money for the pedestal, come up with the land, right? Now that really got one man in particular really angry. Joseph Pulitzer. He was the owner of the New York World newspaper, very renowned newspaper at the time, and he got really angry that he took offense to that. You know, how come we can't come together and pay for a pedestal for such a beautiful gift? We need to get this going. So he did, and the way he did it was a really smart way. He's a smart guy, that Joseph Pulitzer. That's why we named a whole prize after him. I mean, come on, it's the least we could do. So he decides he's going to publish the names of every single person who donates any amount for the project. And support starts pouring in. I mean, people are donating all across the board. It's funny, like there are funny notes that people would send in with their donations. Like this guy was like, I forget exactly what he wrote, but I'm going to paraphrase. He said, I'm donating a dime for every pound I want to lose within a year, or something like that. So we donated like $1. That's 10 pounds he wanted to lose. I hope he accomplished that, but he did donate the money. We had hundreds of thousands of donations, most of them under $1. A bunch of school kids got together. It was a very big community project. And finally they got the money, $100,000 to build the pedestal, get the ball on the road, and they did. And statue is a success. And it opens, and it's New York City's first ticker tape parade, which is pretty cool, right? It was a tradition that went on for decades and decades and decades, and now we don't see that many anymore, which is kind of sad, but anyway. Statue opens, it's a huge celebration, right? It's this big, gigantic woman, and literally 1 million people are sitting on the harbor, on ships, everywhere, just watching the statue come together. They actually had this whole thing that this like drape that they put over her, and in secrecy, you know, secret, and it was amazing. One interesting thing, and this is like a little piece of meat for all the feminists out there, there are 2,000 people on the actual island, on Liberty Island, to celebrate, and only 2 of them are women. Think about that. We're honoring this gigantic woman, right? This like Lady Liberty, and only 2 of them are women. Now, I have a friend, a Texan, she's a woman, and she's a fierce feminist, and when I told her, she's like, exactly, this is why this country's falling behind, and she like made a whole big deal out of it. But I give her props for that. I think they could have had at least 10 women there. That would have been more fair. I mean, anyway, Lady Liberty, beautiful story, and it's still here, and it's a symbol of this beautiful city. Next stop, now just imagine, right, coming into New York Harbor and seeing Lady Liberty there welcoming you, and then you go into Ellis Island. Ellis Island, the Immigrant Processing Center, came together in 1898. That's quite a while ago, and a lot of Americans, I can safely say a good percentage of Americans can trace their ancestry back to Ellis Island. 12 million people entered here, and it was such a system, really. And to illustrate that, we're going to bring you back to that time and to the day when Ellis Island opened. Now, they had this little girl, Anne, from Ireland, from Cork, Ireland, 14 years old. They picked her to be the very first immigrant to enter Ellis Island. Now, she probably would have gotten on some sort of a horse or carriage onto the nearest train station, gotten on a train onto the nearest port city, then gotten on a ship. This is a time when ships are really flourishing, right? And the best way to illustrate that, I hate to say it, I mean, it's not my favorite movie at all, but everybody's seen it, the Titanic. That's how it is, and just watch it and you'll see. It's that class system, right? First class passengers, lower class passengers, and just imagine being out in the water for a very, very long time, weeks even, to come to America. And you're on the basement of a ship if you're poor, and if you're not, you're on the upper level, but it's still a struggle, you know? But obviously the first class passengers got there a little bit easier. Now, here we got Anne, right? She's probably not a rich little girl. She comes over to America, and she gets off. Now, as soon as the ship arrives, they have an officer that comes in, and he does a quick inspection. Now, with this quick inspection, he clears out all the first-class people. So all the rich people, the aristocrats, they're out to go. They can catch a cab and be on the Upper East Side in like 10 minutes. They're good. They just get off the ship, and that's fine. They don't even need to go through Ellis Island. And that's pretty interesting. That's something I had no idea was even the case. Now, the poor people, you know, the 99% of us, we're in a good place to talk about the 99%. They would have to go through this insane system that a lot of times, the average time that it took to go through Ellis Island was about 8 hours altogether, which is pretty tiring. And I can imagine how exhausted I would be being out on the water for weeks and then coming here, going through this hell of a place. And I'll illustrate it for you so you know what we're talking about. So Anne would have to get off, get all her baskets and like jackets and all her stuff. You know, they didn't have like rolling bags that they could just roll freely like we do today at the airport, and it's beautifully smooth and everything. No, they had huge grand stairs. You had to carry all your luggage and all your stuff. So imagine little 14-year-old little Anne coming through Ellis Island, really exhausted, right? And then she comes through and they have a bunch of checks. First thing they would ask people to do, and this is kind of rated R, they would ask people to get naked right there and then, so they could check them, and that was the initial check. They had to make sure that you were okay. That would make sense. Now, one little note that I read, which is pretty interesting, is that a lot of these people are coming from places where the police, the authorities, they beat you, you know, they threaten you, they're not nice to you. You don't see them as a positive part of society. You don't see them as trying to help you out or protect you. You see them as a threat. Now here you are entering America, and the very first thing that they're telling you to do is undress. And it's not, you know, if you've got that background, it's already invasive, but especially coming from a country where authorities are not that nice to you, that's even worse. The worst part of the test, they say, is when they stuck a metal hook under your eye to check for like this contagious blindness disease, and they would literally lift the top of your eye with this metal hook. I know, it's graphic, it's horrible. I mean, and lift it and check if there was anything on it. They said the pain was unbearable and it would last for hours, even after you left Ellis Island. As you can tell, I'm a big defender of the immigrants of Ellis Island. As are... Anyway. But you would go through this system, and if they suspected that you had some sort of a mental illness or anything like that, they would take you into a special section where they would ask you very important questions to test your mental saneness. One of the questions, they took this guy in, they thought he was crazy, and they asked him, what is the best way to wash stairs? From top to bottom, or from bottom to top. What are they doing? Now the guy staring